Hello everyone and welcome to the Chef's Table series. My name is Carol O'Connor, co-host of this educational cooking show. Today we are at a Boston historic landmark, the Union Oyster House, located at 41 Union Street in Boston. Chef Joe, co-host of the Chef's Table series, along with executive chef Rico DiFronzo, will be making these dishes right in front of me. First, clam chowder. Second, a pan-seared potato encrusted haddock, served with beans and roasted bliss potatoes, and served with Union Oyster House's famous cornbread, as well as wine. Later on in the show, you'll see my interview with the president of the Union Oyster House, Joe Milano. So let's bring Chef Rico and Joe Murphy over to learn how to make these dishes.
Hi, I'm Joe Murphy, chef, co-host of the Chef's Table Foundation. And today we are really fortunate to be at the oldest continuing restaurant in the United States. And we're very pleased that we have a real top chef, Chef Rico DiFronzo. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you. Thank you, Chef.
I guess that crowd was clapping for me. What do you think?
Absolutely.
We're going to show you several dishes. The clam chowder. We're going to teach you the Union Oyster House clam chowder. We're going to serve cornbread. We're not going to show how to make that, but we will put that recipe on the website. And I've got to tell you, after owning a good-sized bakery for 5 years, it's incredible. And then after that, what are we going to do?
We're going to do a pan-seared haddock with a halibut vegetable, which is a French green bean, some roasted potatoes. We'll do that as well. And then at the end, we'll serve a dessert, which will be an apple cobbler to house dessert.
Wow, sounds great. Now, one thing we didn't mention on the fish, this is a potato crusted fish, is that correct? Okay. I was talking to somebody before we started shooting, a friend of this lady that's attended the show before, was talking about her friend took a mandolin and sliced potatoes very thin and then rolled the potatoes in them. But there's a much easier way, and I would think by using the method that you're employing, you get a nice crispy crust.
Yes, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using potato flakes.
Potato flakes.
Right. We buy a really wide potato flake.
Okay.
We'll dip it in a little bit of an egg wash.
Yeah.
Roll the fish in the crumbs.
Right.
Do the potato flakes, and then we're going to pan-sear it.
Excellent. And, you know, for the home cook, you certainly don't have access to the ingredients that a restaurant like the Union Oyster House would have. But you can go to your supermarket and get potato flakes. And I think they're an instant mashed potato, basically.
Well, basically, yeah, there is a difference. But yes, pretty much you could use a potato flake, an instant potato flake.
Right. Now, and that will still give you that nice crispy texture.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is great. And just keep in mind, cooking is about building layers of flavor, you know, the bite, meaning how it works in your mouth. So this is a nice technique.
Absolutely.
And it's not deep fried.
No, it's not, but we will be using some butter.
Right.
You know, so it will taste good.
Good. Excellent. Okay. The show is meant to be instructional, so we always talk about
Mise en place.
Mise en place. Everything in its place. So if you're the home chef, you do what the professional chefs do, because your cooking experience will be consistent product when you're done. You'll make your process much more enjoyable because you have all your ingredients laid out. And if you're not baking, you don't have to do portion control, but at least have all your ingredients in place. And that's the term, French term is mise en place. So, Chef, what ingredients do you have now for your clam chowder?
So we've got quite a bit of ingredients down here. We have a lot of classic ingredients you'd find in pretty much just about any New England clam chowder. So we have, obviously, clams here, and we have clams here, so I'll show you the difference between the two. A diced potato. We have salt pork, butter, flour, white pepper, salt, whole dried thyme, onions, celery, a little hot sauce, Tabasco and Worcestershire, and in the two pitchers we have clam juice, and we also have some half and half or cream.
Right. So for the home chef, you know, the bottles of clam juice are very acceptable.
Absolutely. For this particular application, clam juice would be a lot easier on the home
Cook.
cook. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, because generally when you pour it out, you'll find that there's if you find any sand, as opposed to if you're doing it, you're always going to have that residue. And it's really a time thing, you know.
Sure. It depends on how quickly you want to put the soup together.
Right.
In this case, the chowder. It goes together relatively quickly. If you do have everything prepped like you see here, you can put this together in 15, 20 minutes, it's done. But if you try to start making a recipe and you don't have all the ingredients, then sometimes you need to change it up. You can basically, change it. And that's how I think some of these other clam chowders came to be. But the classic New England chowder has been around since the 1800s. Approximately around 1850 is when clam chowder first kind of
probably started at the Union Oyster House.
It may have, but I don't think we were the first ones. I think
well, I'm going to say it.
You can say it. We've been around long enough that we could probably own it, but but we don't want to say anything that's not quite right. But that's what it is.
Okay, so
to get started, you ready?
I'm ready.
Do a little cooking. All right.
Right.
Let's turn this thing on and get going here. All right. So we have heat. Good. So the first thing I want to do is there's two different schools of thought with salt pork. You could basically take the outer skin off if you'd like and add it right in. I should go this way to the camera, sorry. You could add it right in and chew that out. Or you can basically take off the skin. So what I'm going to do is I like to do it this way. We take this, about 2 ounces of salt pork. I like to do what we call scoring it, where you just slice down, make some nice lines through it, and then go across. And what we're going to do is drop this into a dry, hot pan, and it's going to sweat out the fat, which is going to give it that sort of bacony flavor. So we just drop it in the hot pan, a little bit of a sizzle.
Yeah.
And it's going to take about 4 or 5 minutes to render down. And what's going to happen is the oils will come out of the pork. But there are people that like to take the skin off, as I said, and chop it up really small and just throw it in there and make these little crispy bites. Mm-hmm. It's really up to you, but what we do is we do it this way. But other people do have those little brown specks in there, and that's what those little specks are. So while that's cooking, your clams, again, you can buy a sea clam or a chopped clam, which is what this right here is.
Can I ask you a question,
Sure.
Chef? On the sea clam, could you explain the difference between, Snow's clam, chopped clams, and a sea clam? You're talking about a deep sea clam.
Yeah,
is that right?
this is it's a more meaty clam. It's bigger. It's probably around this size here.
Almost like a quahog?
It's bigger than a quahog. Wow. These clams here that I have actually here are a little larger than a cherry stone. The quahogs just weren't able to get them today for the demo. But basically what we normally do is we will steam these open and you'll get some broth from them. Right. We then take them and we just pull this out. This is how we actually clean them when we're doing this for the house. If you want to make fresh clams and you want to get a bag of quahogs and do them at the house, and they just take this out of wrapping off. Now some people again like to chop everything up in it, but you could certainly just take this off and just chop it up. And
now, do you reserve the belly?
You could. We don't here because it just colors the chowder, especially when they're in the stage when they're actually. Let me see if this one's actually doing it before I get too deep into that. Yeah. So this one isn't really spawning. When they spawn, basically the inside here changes color, and when that does, basically it discolors your chowder. So a lot of chefs will take that part out and just use this part of the meat. Okay. It doesn't hurt the chowder. It's a flavor. A lot of people like the taste of it. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that.
Right.
You just slice.
But for presentation purposes, in the people are reading, you just go with the meat portion. Exactly. But if you're the home chef, and
why waste it? I mean, if you don't mind the color. So you can kind of see now that there's some oil in here now that just came out of the salt pork. I don't know if you can see in the bottom of the pan there. See it there. You can kind of wiggle it a little bit there. You can see it kind of shimmer. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're talking about. So we're going to do this for a few more minutes.
Right. So, Chef, if I can just interject, this spatula.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, with the red handle, that will tell you right away that this will not melt in a hot pan. Not that you want to keep it in a hot, sizzling pan like this, but
Right.
it's not going to melt and corrupt whatever you're trying to make. So look for the red handle. They are available now in
Absolutely.
stores. You always saw them in professional kitchens, but this is a great tool to have.
And for this small amount of chowder, actually, I'm not even going to use a whip. I'm going to use this for the whole dish. But it is heat tempered, and it can go upwards of 450 degrees. So, but again, I'm not leaving it in the pan. They do sell these at name of the store, like just about anybody. One of these Bed Bath and Beyond is the one I know
Yeah.
that they sell them in. A lot of the TV chefs have endorsed them. You know, you can see some of the TV chefs have them there. But eventually, we're going to take this piece of salt pork out. So at this point right now, I think we have enough fat in there. We can add our butter. So we're going to add some whole butter in here. We're just going to add it till it melts.
Now, Chef, I always try to tell the viewing audience that when you're in a professional kitchen, you will not use salted butter.
That's correct.
So I recommend strongly for the home cook, get a pound of it, freeze 3 sticks, and keep one there for your cooking. Because you're better off seasoning TT. You'll see that symbol in your cookbooks, to taste.
So that butter's all melted there.
Great.
All right, so we're going to add now our vegetables. So we're just going to lightly saute the onions, celery. We're going to cook it to a state what they call translucent, which is really when the onions are pretty much about 3/4 of the way cooked. We're just going to lightly saute that, and we're going to leave that salt pork in just to keep having it rendering in the butter until we get to the point where we're ready to take it out.
And that's really giving a lot of flavor too.
It is, and that's why unsalted butter is not necessary in this recipe, because salt pork obviously has the salt, the clams are salty, so you're already adding salt in there. The juice has salt, so
Right.
by the time you're done, really, we won't be adding any salt here. We just have it here just in case we need a pinch or two at the end to
Right.
finish.
Yeah, and I want to, Chef just gave you a great tip. When you are cooking, think through your recipe. For instance, you have salt pork, as he said, you have the clams that come from the ocean, so you have the sea salt, and you know, you can finish, when you finish your dish, you can see if it needs that little pinch of salt. Okay.
Another thing, kind of a fun fact, if you want to know how you tell how old these clams are. And we don't do this here, but the professionals do this. It's like a rings in a tree. For every one of these rings that is on, it's how many years this clam is aged.
Really?
So the largest one that they found is over 500 years old.
Wow.
Found it in Iceland. So that was a big clam. I don't know, but they have it actually over there in the maritime. Like we have the aquarium here. That's where they have it actually there. But yeah, between 400 and 500 years old, these things can get. So they get really big.
Wow.
But the ones that we're using today, these are probably about 4 or 5 years old. And the ones like the quahogs are probably 6 or 7 years old. The quahogs are, again, about almost, like I said, double the size of this one here.
So I'm guessing, I want to ask the question rather than guess. All your products are locally sourced, is that correct?
Yes, it's from the coast of New England all the way up pretty much to Canada, where most of the products come from.
Okay.
So it's time to get the salt pork out. So basically what we're looking at, so you can see it's browned.
Get that nice caramelization.
And this could stay in a little bit longer if we'd like, but once we add the flour, it's kind of hard to work with the flour and make a roux.
Right.
I'm not sure everybody knows what a roux is, but it's basically equal parts of butter and flour, French term. And we cook it for a short period of time because it's a... So basically we're going to add our flour next. We don't want to... There we go.
The longer you cook a roux, just for your own information, it becomes darker, and there are several different stages. So as it turns golden, you're going to get a different flavor from just the white roux when it's first cooked. And the next level, as it gets deeper, you're starting to get a nutty flavor. So
Correct.
keep that in mind when you're cooking, what you're trying to accomplish. If you want a nutty flavor, which I wouldn't want in my clam chowder, but you're using roux for your sauces and gravies, so just keep that in mind.
Right, so we're just going to cook this a minute or two, just to cook out a little of the starch. And what we're going to do is we're making pretty much what's considered a white roux, which means it's only been cooked for a couple minutes. And if we take it to the next stage, it becomes a blonde roux. And if we take it to the last stage that Chef just mentioned, then it becomes a brown roux. And you usually find that a lot of Cajun cooking. And in our case, we're obviously we're doing New England cooking, so we tend to find things lighter. So once we're at this point right now, we've got a nice bubbling. We're ready to basically add our stock. And I have it right away. So we have that clam juice here.
And you're gonna get usually a frothing action when you add to that hot.
Right.
There's, you have the fats from the pork, salt pork, and then the butter. So just be careful. This is a large enough saucepan, and so you're not gonna get it hit with it. But
And we're gonna add our thyme.
right now, you're using a dry thyme, correct?
Correct.
Okay, which is fine. So I mentioned that, you can buy fresh thyme, which is great, but, you're not using a lot of time in your home cooking, so a decent, dry thyme would be fine.
So I'm gonna add my potatoes, because the idea now is that when this comes up to a boil, in about 8 or 10 minutes, those potatoes will be cooked.
Right.
So then we won't have to work. That's one of the reasons I'm not using a whip at the moment, because if I use a whip right now, I'll be starting to break my potatoes up, and there won't be really any left for you to be able to see. You can parboil potatoes. For this particular recipe, we really don't have to, because once we bring it up to boil, we cut them really small, very small dice. They'll cook pretty quick.
Right. Yeah, and another thing, I asked the chef, because I think this is an important point, and I've had trouble, anytime I made this dish, you don't want to get this so cooked, the potato, that it's going to start disintegrating on its own. And also, I asked the chef, what what variety do you prefer?
For the chowders, we use like an Idaho potatoes as our preference.
Right, and that's a dry potato. So, just keep that in mind. And then chef gave you another great tip. Be careful with the whisk, because you could break that up, and then you're gonna, potato is a starch, so it's gonna wind up being an additional thickener. But you want that extra bite, when you're eating. You want that new insertion of texture.
So right at this point right now, we're going to let it basically come up to a full boil. At about 180 degrees, the roux is going to start to actually thicken. So we pretty much have to just wait a few minutes for that to happen. Once that happens and we start to see the thickness taking place, we'll test the potatoes if they're almost cooked. Then we'll add our clams, bring it back to a boil, and just add a couple more ingredients, and then we'll finish.
Right.
So it comes up that quickly.
Wow. Now, chef on his mise en place is using white pepper. For me, when I'm cooking at home, I keep white pepper in the house, but I use it so infrequently.
Exactly.
You can use black pepper.
Absolutely.
And it's more for appearance than anything,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Right. I mean, you'll see small specks of black pepper in a lot of people's dishes, because that's the reason why a lot of chefs pretty much prefer black pepper, so that they know
Right.
they can see it.
Right.
And it's a little stronger flavor. But I find the white pepper is a lot hotter, so it doesn't take much. TT
right.
is to taste, but we're
Right.
talking small pinch.
I'm glad Chef said that, because I mentioned that on the show, that white pepper to the taste, to the palate, is hotter generally than a black.
That's correct.
And he looked at me like I was crazy, but it's just, a lot of times really good cooking is about experience and what you build your skill level, and you can start making these changes. This gives me an opportunity to tell you something I always say. This is a creative process. If you are the cook at home, you're the artist. And as you grow, don't expect to become a top chef or a great home cook overnight. You're going to make your mistakes. Professional chefs do. If they're creating new recipes, they're adjusting, changing until they get exactly what they want. And that's what you should be thinking of.
Tilt it back a little bit, that we have, you can see that the soup has some thickness to it. So let's see how our potatoes are doing there. Let's- I think it might as well be the taste, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Another minute or two? Mm-hmm. All right, so another minute or two.
Chef just had me taste this, and it's always good. Keep a few spoons for your tasting. Even if they're plastic, it's not like they're gonna get melt. Just take what you want quickly and taste it. So,
All right. So I think we're ready. Let's go with the clams. So we're going to add some clams there now. And again, the idea is we'll drop these clams in there. It'll knock it down from a boil, and we'll add them nice and slow.
Chef, I have a question.
Sure.
When you're putting this clam in the meat, if they become overcooked, do they become chewy?
They can, absolutely. I mean, but it tends to be the texture of clam chowder. Once the clams are pretty much done cooking, we usually shut it off and we're ready to serve. We'll be ready to serve this in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Wow.
That'll be
Right.
it.
Right.
You just want to bring it right back up to a quick boil.
Yeah.
And then when it's up to a boil, we're just going to give it a quick seasoning. So we're just going to give it maybe just a pinch of pepper.
Right.
And maybe just a dash or two of Tabasco.
Which is nice.
Yeah. And again, and these are optional. Some people don't like Worcestershire. Some people have an allergy, to Worcestershire sauce, so obviously you wouldn't use it. Because there is anchovies in Worcestershire, and that's sometimes where people have the allergy from. So just a matter of knowing what your guests would like. So you can see we got a nice, creamy.
Yeah.
Just want to bring it back up to that boil, and once we do that, we'll taste it before we add the cream.
Now, Chef, I have a question. I always recommend on the show, do not use table salt for your cooking. Switch over to kosher or sea salt. And I feel they have better flavor profiles. But even more importantly, because the crystals on kosher and sea salt are much larger, okay, you're going to be using less salt, which means less sodium. So keep that in mind. And you don't need as much salt when you're using a kosher or sea salt.
That's correct.
And
That's what I have over here. We have kosher here.
Kosher. Now, are you a purist that you think you should be using sea salt with seafood?
I think kosher salt works fine for us here.
I do too.
We're ready now, Chef, for the cream.
Okay.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Give it a go.
Okay.
Mix right there. I just want to see. We may not need all this cream. Let me lower this down just a little bit. Yeah, stick a little. That's it.
Okay. Now, if you do not want to use a heavy cream, you can use half and half, or say a light cream, a heavy cream. You can use a half and half, which is acceptable. And you're still going to have a great flavor.
There we go.
And also, you're going to be using less fat, obviously, with the half and half. And you've got the roux for a thickener, so it's not like you're reducing a heavy cream to be the thickener.
Exactly.
Okay?
Let's go. Just to see if it needs any additional seasoning.
Okay.
Doesn't need salt.
Okay.
Sure. Want to taste it, Jeff?
Sure.
There you go. So we're just going to bring this up to a low simmer. Let it simmer for a few minutes, and
Oh my!
ready to serve.
That is absolutely delicious.
Yeah, that's it. It's a classic New England dish.
Because after I did the tasting of the potato, I said, "Gee, this needs some seasoning." You did a pretty good job there, Chef.
I've made it once or twice.
Ah, yeah, there you
Made it
go.
once or twice.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to recap one thing Chef had talked about earlier. And if you're a purist and want to steam your own clams, I don't think we talked about, after you steam them, you're going to have that residue of moisture in the bottom that comes from the clam. When you open the clam, there's going to be liquid in there. That is your base for your stock. So you just have to drain out
If you decide you're going to do it that way, what you want to do is make sure you strain it through a cheesecloth or a very, very fine mesh filter.
Right.
Because what will happen is there'll be sand and grit in there. And that'll be in your chowder, and you'll be getting these little pieces of sand when you're eating it. So you really need to strain that thing out if you're going to do that. But if you buy a store-bought canned clam juice or bottled clam juice, it's already been done.
Can we plate that, Chef, so we can get a look at it?
Sure.
Do you have a
Right over there?
Okay.
Yes. Now, we would let this cook for the restaurant a little bit longer. You'll see the clam chowder that comes out will be a little thicker than this. If I let this cook for a few more minutes, it'll just continue to thicken.
Right.
But at this point, we could actually serve it. If you like it a little bit looser, this would be the time to do it. And if you like it a little thicker, just back off on your cream. If you really like it really tight, just increase the flour a little bit. And at that point, it'll have a little more starch in it, and it'll basically tighten it up even better.
Right. And just do that tasting of the potato to make sure they're cooked. Okay, Chef, this has been great. And I know we're going to move into our main course, which is the potato crusted haddock.
Correct.
And we're going to be shown how to skin fish.
Yep.
And I'm hoping the skin doesn't come off, because...
Uh-oh. Putting the pressure on me now.
No, I'm not, because I want the home chef to know that, as you explained earlier, which I found out myself, what happens.
Once in a while, it just doesn't work. The skin doesn't you got to burn your knife, and all it takes is a little bit of a burr. Just catch it the wrong way, and you cut through the skin.
Right. So if you are the home cook and you buy, well, haddock, they usually it's always skin on. That way you can tell the difference between cod and haddock.
Correct.
Okay? But you can ask your fishmonger to take the skin off. Once he charges you for that, he's not going to take it off and lose his margin. But in any event, if you want to start learning how to do it, a sharp knife, and you don't want any burrs. But it does happen even with professionals, so that's the only point.
Right.
Not that you would ever have that problem.
We'll see. Now we'll see. The pressure's on. We'll see.
Okay. So we're going to just make a few changes, and we'll be back in a moment. Okay, with the magic of television, we did a face-off competition, and I have Chef Rico's face, and he has my face.
There you go.
And looking at you, you're much better looking than I am right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the compliment.
Okay. All right, we're going to do the entree section of this cooking show. And I just want you to know that on the clam chowder, it takes probably twice as long as doing the fish as opposed to the chowder. So keep that in mind if you decide to try this dish yourself at home. So, Chef,
Okay.
what are we going to do first?
So we have some haddock. So what I do is I have some fillets here, and Chef had mentioned about the skin. So basically we have the haddock. You can tell by that black line that runs down the fish and the color of the skin. Basically, normally they take the scales off when you buy this in the supermarket, but you can tell that this is white, pristine. And the interesting thing about fish is that if it's really fresh, it doesn't smell like fish. It actually smells like the ocean, or it has a very mild, sweet smell. So when you're picking up a piece of fish and you're smelling it, and it has that really fish smell, as they call it, it's on its way out. It's starting to get old. So in this case, we have some really nice white, pristine fish, and we're going to take a piece of this, and we're going to use this for our entree.
Excellent. And I want to point one thing out. You know, wherever you buy your fresh seafood, do not be embarrassed. As Chef just told you, the smell test, I would not be embarrassed to ask the person behind that counter if he could hold it close enough so that you can smell it. And it's the same with buying scallops. You know, you have dry scallops, wet scallops. So do not be embarrassed to ask questions.
Okay.
So Chef is going to show us.
So let's see how it works here. So basically what I like to do is I make a small indentation. This little piece of the tail here is really kind of tough and chewy, and there's really not much to it. So I just make a little slit, and then kind of with a little sawing motion get started. And then I put the pressure on pulling the skin against the knife, and just kind of wiggle the skin and kind of hold the knife steady. And if you just keep wiggling it and just keep your knife steady and just let up the pressure when you get near the end, you should end up with a piece of skin. So if it works, let's see how we did.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
There you go.
Maybe a
job.
teeny piece left behind here. Yeah, we'll just take that off just for the sake of, for those that basically would want to make sure it's all off.
So
Okay.
in skinning a fillet, you know, they have knives that are a lot more flexible than the chef's knife that Chef Rico is using, but make sure that knife is sharp, sharp, sharp. And one reason you may not get the skin off, if there's a slight burr, it catches, and then you're tearing the fish. It doesn't mean you can't eat the fish because, you know, it's still great product, but
So this is a pretty simple procedure. What we have in here is we have some basic cracked eggs. We added just a touch of cream just to loosen the eggs up. If you can't have dairy, or cream in other words, you could also add a little bit of water to loosen up the eggs, or you don't have to. We just find that when it loosens up the eggs, it's just a little easier for the potato crust to adhere. So potato crust, again, you can see the size of the flakes are really big. And the other thing is we're just going to add a little seasoning to this, just to kind of start that building of the flavor we talked about a little earlier. So just a little bit of salt, white pepper. Just mix it in. So just dip it in the egg. You probably have done this a million times for other dishes, classic chicken parm. We don't put the flour on, we just go straight to the egg and right in. And Chef, would you turn this one on?
Yeah.
Get that nice and hot for us. And then just give it a nice good coating and just let it rest for a minute until our pan's hot. So just get this out of the way.
Yeah, sometimes we're not frying here, but if you were frying, you want to take a paper towel and dry that fillet off, okay? Here we're sauteing, and another thing we want to talk and give you a little bit of a tip. We are using butter, unsalted butter. Now, if you're going to use a saute, just keep in mind, if that butter gets really hot, it's going to start turning brown and black. We don't want that. What we want to do, and Chef, you jump in here,
Sure.
is get that crust going.
Right. So what we've done with this butter, this isn't just a regular butter. What we did is we melted this butter in advance, so it's clarified butter. So what we let happen was the milk solids dropped to the bottom, we skimmed the top off, so we use clarified butter because we can heat it at a higher temperature. The milk solids are what brown and burn, so we have the ability to get this hotter. Now, if you didn't want to use butter, you could certainly use oil. Nothing wrong with using oil. Nice canola oil, has a nice smoke point.
Yeah.
Olive oil, some people love to use virgin olive oil. It just depends on what your tastes are.
Right.
But with butter, it works well for us here. It also adds that potato and butter flavor when you're putting everything together here. So we're just gonna, again, you can see nice covering of crumbs here. In this case, potato crumbs.
Yeah, I just want to mention on your choice of oil, and if you're not used to use olive oil, but I do use canola, depending on how long it's going to be sauteed or frying in that oil. Because olive oil has a very low smoke point. Now, a good friend of ours and a real top chef who does a segment on the show, Steve LeCount, he loves grapeseed oil.
Yep, there are chefs. Every chef seems to have their preference for it.
But
So this particular dish here, when we're at the restaurant, now I use the tail piece here because it's thin, so we can basically pretty much cook this entire thing in the pan. If I was using the top of the fish or the head section, what we normally do is brown it and basically put it in the oven and bake it for a few minutes, just to make sure it's cooked all the way through. So that's really the difference between using the tail piece or the head piece. If it's the tail, we put it in the pan, we cook it all the way. If it's not the head piece, then we just, like I said, we'll put it in the oven for a few minutes.
So again, even though it's clarified, if it's a thick piece, it's going to take longer to cook in the saute. So finish it in the oven. Now, another thing I want to mention is we don't have one here. It's called a sizzle pan.
Correct.
And it's aluminum, egg-shaped. They are absolutely great for cooking or finishing in an oven or reheating because they're aluminum and they really come up to temperature, and it really reheats or cooks quickly with that.
So the other parts of the dish we have our helical veal, which we poached. We poached it because we're going to just reheat them in the pan quickly for you. And we also made a roast potato, which we added basically garlic, seasoning, salt, pepper, a little paprika for color. Secret ingredient we like to use is Old Bay, a little bit of Old Bay spice, and we have it in the house all the time. Just adds a little bit of a different flavor element to the potato. And so we're going to warm that up in the saute pan. So pretty much that's what we're doing here. Once the pan gets warm, we'll be ready to go.
Okay.
You want to start with your little bit of garlic, Chef?
Yeah. Let me,
How's that look? Nice color?
Oh, yeah, beautiful, golden brown. We're using a very fine diced garlic here, so what I want to caution you on, if you're not used to garlic, most people are, do not let the garlic burn.
Right.
Because if it burns, you can just throw it, there's no way of saving that dish, okay?
So what we're doing is I pulled it up off the heat, letting that pan just cool off just a little bit because we're not sure how hot it is. Chef, want to add some peppers?
Sure. Yeah, and he just gave you actually a great tip. If that pan is too hot, don't panic. Just take it right off the burner and set it on if you have a granite counter, it can stand the heat, or if you have some sort of a pad, do not be afraid to do that, okay? Yep. So these potatoes have been roasted already, so we're doing a quick reheat. And as we do this, this is a great way to cut down your cooking time. So, just keep them moving so that they don't stick to the pan.
So again, we're using, again, butter in these dishes to reheat. But again, you don't have to do the beans this way. You could, just poach them in water, put them right on the plate, put a little bit of salt and pepper if you like salt and pepper, or just serve them plain.
So we have a beautiful Union Oyster House platter, dish. These are great. I love this Red Bliss roasted potato. And you can roast these off if you're home doing nothing on a Sunday and you're sick of your husband sitting watching football games or whatever. Tell him to get out and roast the potatoes, because you can draw from those for 3 or 4 days during the week.
And the beans. Ready, sir?
Yeah, that's all set.
Right there. 5 or 6 more. There you go. Perfect. So again, it's relatively a simple dish. We do this dish on the menu. We do a different type of vegetable. We'll do it with a mixed vegetable, kind of a seasonal vegetable, summertime, little zucchini, summer squash, onions, peppers, and so forth. So I thought for this particular dinner tonight, we would do the helicover. I just think it adds a nice little color to the plate.
Right.
It's that simple, Chef.
Absolutely great. In closing, I just want to make one quick point here. If you noticed how quickly this came together, okay? So keep that in mind. If you want to do the clam chowder, you could make that the day before. It's up to you.
Absolutely.
But that's quick. And if you want to buy these type burners, you can be talking to your guests if you have guests, and just do this very quickly. These burners are very inexpensive. So it's just a suggestion. And I do want you to know that the Chef's Table is proud to have its mission dedicated to supporting the homeless in the state of Massachusetts, in the U.S. veterans and homeless teenagers. And I wish we had a little bit more time. I could go into that. But somebody just picked up an axe or a hook. I can't quite see. So I have to end the show. So on behalf of the Chef's Table Foundation, we'd love to have you watch the show. We sincere thanks
Thank you,
to
Chef.
you, Chef.
Thank you, Chef.
And to the president of the Union Oyster House, Joe Milano. Carol did an extensive interview with him that you'll see on the show. Amazing guy. It's worth, if you don't watch the master cooking, hear Joe, hear his story. He is truly all about service. And we hope you watch the show, and we hope to see you the next time around. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the restaurant interview segment of the Chef's Table series. I am here at the longest running restaurant in the United States, the Union Oyster House, a Boston landmark. I am here with the president of the Union Oyster House, Joe Milano. Joe, thank you so much for being on the segment with me today. And Joe, before we get into the restaurant, tell me about your personal history, because it's very fascinating what I've read about you.
Yeah. Well, prior to my coming to the restaurant, I've been here 45 years.
Wow.
Much of my life has been military. So when this program was talked about, what really was near and dear to me was the veteran, the homeless veteran, and the caring and the education and so forth. So yes, she came to us of interest, and we do have certainly a presence in Boston and throughout the nation. But more so is the fact for the reason why you're here is the importance of why we accept this invitation. Yes.
Excellent. Now you belong to different groups, and you also have a connection with Thailand.
Yes,
Tell me
I
about
do.
that.
Okay. My military, I went to the Military College of Vermont. So I went to Norwich University, and it was during the Vietnam era. So once I was commissioned, or ROTC commissioned, I spent 3 years in active duty. So it was kind of a busy time in our country, and much was going on in Southeast Asia. So I was in U.S. Army, was my branch. Medical Service Corps was specifically my background, since I was a biochem major in college. And I believe it was in 1989, 1990, I was fortunate to be promoted as a brigadier general, special advisor to the adjutant general within the Commonwealth. I was a commander in 1989. I served as captain commanding. I took the company, we call the company members and guests, to Thailand. It was principally, but we did a stop at Washington and received by President Bush on a presidential send-off. So he spent much time with us and courtesy and renderings. And then from there we flew over to Japan, spent time there. But Thailand was the big focus, and that had to do with an audience with the king of Thailand.
Wow.
So that was kind of the beginning of the Thailand piece. I was fortunate later to be asked if I would consider being the Consul General for Thailand. So about 15 years ago, back in the 2000 period, early 2000s.
Yeah, that's right. 2000.
Yeah, I interviewed. I had to go to Thailand. I went down to the embassy. I was fortunate to be selected. So we operate a consulate here in Boston. Primarily our function is doing visas. We do about 1,200 visas a year. I have a full-time person who handles visas. I have a vice consul who does a lot of logistical stuff, needs. The connection of Boston and Cambridge with the King of Thailand is the fact that he was born at Mount Auburn Hospital. So that is the strong connection. So when I brought the group, the military group, to Thailand at that time, I wanted to do something significant, and since the birth was in Cambridge, I went to the city council and had a resolution passed, which actually named a square in Thailand right by the hospital after King Bhumibol Adulyadej, which is King of Thailand Square. So I presented the resolution to the king at an audience, which was quite significant.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, you have a... I can talk to you for another 45 minutes about your history, but that's an impressive military, and thank you for your service. So
You're welcome.
what brought you to the Union Oyster House?
Well, I needed a job once I got out of active duty. I always liked people. I thought I was going to dental school. I had applied to dental school, and I was fortunate to get in. I really wasn't sure. I like cooking. I like people. I think the biggest thing was I really enjoyed people. I enjoyed leadership, military school, and my training, and then my work within the military taught me, leadership, and basically a lot of it was entrepreneurial. So there was an opportunity to come here in 1970, and prior to that I had 2 years of experience in a restaurant franchise. So in coming here, my father and I had met with the ownership and subsequently did a buy-in, buy-out of the restaurant. Restaurant during those days was probably about 250 seat restaurant. Today we're close to 600 seats.
In
we're
here?
in 5 buildings.
Wow.
So you're in a building right now that looks quite historic. The building is old. The room goes back to 1980. So we had this opportunity back in the early 70s. We came here and continue to grow the restaurant. My father unfortunately died at a very early age. My sister and I are totally involved and immersed in the restaurant
Oh, I'm
today.
sure.
We serve as kind of what we call stewards or caretakers. So such a wonderful, wonderful place. So
Tell us some interesting historical tidbits about this restaurant. Like back in the 1700s.
yeah.
So many.
Well, there's a lot of history in the old original building.
Right.
So as what we call the brand of the restaurant is really identified with the building where it all started. So you have an oyster bar. Appropriately, it was called, or is called today, is Webster's Bar.
And that's the original one.
That is the original.
going to that one.
So the bar itself
Love
is
it.
where it started.
That's
as
the
a raw
history.
bar. We would call it today a raw bar, but it was an oyster bar. And then the evolution really kind of took place where there were more than just shellfish that was served, and chowder and steamers and other, again, all seafood
Right.
items came from that. So therefore you needed a kitchen, and you had booths that people sat in. So it all started in that building. But if we go historically, where the restaurant opened in 1826, there is quite a bit of history,
Yes.
which I will start with, and then I will tell a little about the history.
Okay.
The building itself of 41 Union Street is a National Historic Landmark.
Right.
It is the only restaurant in the United States that has the designation as a National Historic Landmark, designated by Department of Interior back in 2003. Most unusual,
Right.
and also because because of its history, and as well as being the oldest restaurant of continuous service in the United States. So let's get to the history piece. There was an exiled Frenchman back in the late 1700s that lived in the building, exiled from France, and eventually returned to France. His name is Louis Philippe. So exiled and returned, and in 1830 became known as the common man's king, Louis
Oh.
Philippe. Quite significant.
Yes.
Many people come from France. They want to know, they've read about the history,
Yes.
they want to know about where he lived, where he stayed, and so forth. So that is on the second level of the old original section of the restaurant.
Wow.
Today.
And like you had mentioned, and the restaurant has grown because you acquired
Yes.
more buildings.
So you had one building.
Yep.
When we got here, it was in 2 buildings, or a second building,
Right.
as it went upstairs and across with the dining rooms. Today we're in an additional building, or a building that not only has, this is used as a function room, it's used for lunch,
Oh, okay.
private parties, rehearsal dinner was held last Friday.
Oh,
Very unusual things.
wow.
Yeah.
This is, and I noticed you have like tons of pictures, history.
Yeah, well,
It's amazing.
this again, we're getting back to why we are in partnership today. Is this homeless veterans?
Correct.
It's very significant because of the memorabilia on the walls having to do with military. So it shows certainly the ancient and honorable. It shows my university, Norwich University, which is the
Oh, yeah.
Military College of
Yes.
Vermont. It shows the Honorable Artillery Company up here. There's a symbol up here having to do with the Swiss Guards. So what you have, the Swiss Guard is the oldest military organization in the world. The Honorable Artillery that founded us in 1638 is the second oldest, and we're the third oldest. So we're the oldest, and certainly in
Oh my
the
goodness.
nation. Yeah.
Wow, there's so much history. I love it.
Yeah, the sections of the restaurant, or as you walk through the restaurants, the different rooms, what is on the wall is all us. There's not nostalgia we bring in here. So if you see prints or you see anything, and I'm sure there was filming or done
Yes.
certainly earlier or will be done that will show much of the way the restaurant looked back 100 years ago, menus that were reflecting back as much as 150 years ago, but scenes on the oyster bar, scenes that surrounded the area, the front of the restaurant and so forth. It's really kind of very nostalgic. People love it. We enjoy it. It just kind of fits.
So you
It
must,
is what we are.
right, and because it's such a historical landmark, you must meet so many different people.
Days today, so if we're talking summertime, it would not be uncommon that you'd be doing anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 people a day.
A day.
A day. On weekends, it's higher.
Right.
So in the course of a year, we could be doing anywhere from 4 to 500,000 people. It's quite a few people.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And people love it and enjoy it. Today we were really quite busy for lunch. We have a lot of nonstop flights from Asia, which we didn't have. We didn't have up
It
to
is
5
now.
years ago. So on average, studies have shown that 80% of those flights going and coming that fly directly into Boston, from Boston back to that part of the world,
Yes.
about 80% are the foreigners. But I think significantly Boston, and much of what we carry, probably with the exception of shrimp, which comes from, a lot of it coming from Southeast Asia, is indigenous to the area. So much of the
Correct.
seafood that you get here, whether it's fin fish or shellfish, certainly lobster being the king of the ocean,
Especially in Boston.
is here. It's all off our shores, and so what's really wonderful is when people come to Boston, it isn't the seafood they're having for the most part are just the catch of the day.
Correct.
Really, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, thank you for sharing your story with us. I mean, the military, the history, and the Union Oyster House. There's just so much to learn here, and I'm sure our viewers. And also, like when you come here, you can go to different parts of the restaurant, and you're always learning and still having such a great
It's
meal.
kind of a walk in history.
Exactly.
We kid about the term "hungry for history," but certainly come here to
That's
eat.
a good one. Hungry for
And
history. I love that one.
But I think the importance is it's what we serve. We have to be consistent in what we do. That's why we're thrilled to do your group here today, and it just makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. The Chef's Table Foundation is so happy to have the Union Oyster House be on the show, and as well as support our mission.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You have a great mission.
Thank you.
That's why you're here.
That's right.
Thank you.
So everyone, this has been the Restaurant Interview segment of the Chef's Table series. I'm Carol O'Connor, co-host with President of the Union Oyster House, Joe Milano. And we'll see you next week.
You know, these are great. I love this Red Bliss roasted potato. And you can roast these off if you're home doing nothing on a Sunday and you're sick of your husband sitting watching football games or whatever. Tell him to get out and roast the potatoes because you can draw from those for 3 or 4 days during the week.